Tonight, I want to teach you something that Carl Jung believed was the most important discovery a human being could ever make. Not about the world outside, but about the world within. Tonight, we are going to go into the shadow, that dark, hidden part of yourself that you have spent your entire life trying not to see. Jung believed that inside every one of us there lives another self, older than your name, older than your memories, a self that carries everything you were told to hide, everything you were ashamed of, everything the world said was unacceptable. And Jung said something extraordinary about this hidden self. He said, the less you see it, the more it controls you. Tonight, as you rest, as your body grows heavy and the day finally releases you, we are going to meet the shadow, not to fight it, not to destroy it, but to finally understand it. And in understanding it, begin to become whole. Close your eyes. Let your body sink into wherever you are resting tonight. Feel the weight of your limbs, the softness beneath you, the quiet around you. Breathe in slowly and breathe out. Let the day go, all of it. The conversations, the decisions, the things left undone. Let them drift like leaves on dark water. You are here now, safe, still, present, and in this stillness, something interesting happens. The mind, which has been busy all day, begins to slow, and in that slowing, things begin to surface. Feelings you did not have time for, impulses you push down, a quiet voice that has been waiting all day for the noise to stop. Jung knew this voice. He spent his life listening to it. He called it the voice of the unconscious, and he believed that within the unconscious lived the shadow. Tonight, we listen. What is the shadow? We use the word shadow every day. We talk about shadows on the ground, shadows cast by light, shadows that shift and move. But Jung meant something entirely different. He meant the shadow inside you, the part of your own mind that exists in darkness, not because it is evil, but because you have never turned the light toward it. Tonight, we begin to understand what that shadow truly is, where it came from, what it wants, and why Jung believed that meeting it was the most important thing a human being could ever do. In 1913, Carl Jung sat alone in a room. Outside, the world was moving toward war. Inside, Jung was moving toward something else entirely. He was descending into his own mind, into the parts of himself he had never dared to look at directly. What he found there changed everything. He found another Carl Jung, darker, angrier, more primitive, more honest. He called this figure the shadow, and he spent the rest of his life trying to help humanity understand what he had found. So what exactly is the shadow? Jung described it simply. The shadow is everything you are that you do not know you are. Read that again slowly. Everything you are that you do not know you are. It is the part of your personality that formed in darkness, not because it is evil, but because the light of consciousness never reached it. Jung wrote that everyone carries a shadow, and the less it is recognized, the darker and denser it becomes. Think of it this way. Imagine a house. A beautiful house, clean, orderly, well lit, but beneath the house there is a basement. And in that basement, everything that did not fit in the house above was quietly placed, not thrown away, just stored, hidden. The basement is the shadow. And here is what Jung discovered that most people never realize. What is stored in the basement does not simply sit there quietly. It moves, it speaks, it finds its way upstairs in ways you do not expect. In your sudden irritation at someone who did nothing wrong, in your inexplicable fear of something perfectly safe, in the way you sometimes say things you immediately regret, in the dreams that disturb you and the impulses that embarrass you. That is the shadow knocking on the floor above, asking to be seen. Jung said, "The shadow is not a problem to be solved, it is a reality to be integrated." And the difference between those two words is everything. To solve would mean to eliminate, but the shadow cannot be eliminated. It is part of you, as real as your name, as real as your face. Integration means something different. It means to bring what is hidden into the light of awareness, to look at what you have stored in the basement with honest eyes, without flinching, without judgment, with the simple courage to say, "This too is me." How the shadow forms. Now that we understand what the shadow is, a deeper question arises. How did it get there? No one is born with a shadow. No child enters the world already hiding pieces of themselves. The shadow is not something you were given. It is something that was built quietly, carefully, over the years of your childhood, your education, your relationships, your experience of being human in a world that always had opinions about who you should be. Tonight, we trace that building. We go back to understand how the basement filled up and why none of it was ever your fault. The shadow does not arrive fully formed. It is built slowly, quietly, over years. It begins in childhood. When you were very young, you had no shadow. You were simply yourself, fully present, fully feeling. You cried when you were sad. You raged when you were angry. You wanted what you wanted without apology. And then the world began to respond. Some things you did were met with warmth, with approval, with love. And other things were met with silence, with disapproval, with the withdrawal of that love. And so, a very intelligent part of you began to learn. It learned what was acceptable and what was not. And very carefully, it began to hide what was not. Your anger, if anger was not allowed, went into the basement. Your neediness, if need was seen as weakness, went into the basement. Your creativity, if creativity was called impractical, went into the basement. Your sensitivity, if sensitivity was mocked, went into the basement. And slowly, a version of you emerged that was acceptable, that fit, that was loved. Jung called this version the persona, the mask, the face we wear for the world. And here is the tragedy Jung identified. The more perfect the persona, the darker the shadow, because everything that was exiled to build that perfect mask has to go somewhere. It goes into the basement. It becomes the shadow. Jung wrote, "The brighter the light, the darker the shadow it casts." Think about the people you know who present the most perfect image to the world, always composed, always right, always in control, and notice how sometimes, without warning, something else emerges, a cruelty, a rage, a vulnerability so overwhelming it surprises even them. That is the shadow, asserting itself. That is the basement, forcing its door open. This is not weakness. This is not failure. This is simply what happens when any part of the self is denied for too long. Society too creates shadow, not just in individuals, but in groups, nations, cultures, religions. Whatever a society declares unacceptable becomes the collective shadow. And just like the individual shadow, the collective shadow does not disappear. It simply waits. And when it erupts, we call it war. We call it violence. We call it madness. Jung saw this clearly. He watched it happen in his own lifetime. 2 world wars, driven in part by the collective shadow of entire nations, erupting into the light. Which is why Jung believed that understanding the shadow was not merely a personal task, it was a moral one, a civilizational one. The world could not become more conscious until the individuals within it became more conscious. And that begins with each of us going into our own basement, alone, honestly, with a lamp. The shadow in your daily life. The shadow is not something that stays neatly in the basement. It leaks. It seeps into the ordinary moments of your life, into your conversations, your reactions, your dreams, your relationships. Most of the time, you do not recognize it as the shadow. You simply think, "That person irritates me," or "I had a strange dream last night," or "I don't know why I reacted that way." But Jung gave us a map, a way of reading these moments, not as random noise, but as messages, signals from the part of you that has been waiting to be heard. Tonight, we learn to read that map. You may be wondering where your shadow shows up. How would you know it if you saw it? Jung gave us a map. The first place the shadow appears is in projection. Projection is when what is inside us appears to be outside us. When we cannot see something in ourselves, we see it in others. Jung wrote, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves." Let that sit for a moment. Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. Think of someone who genuinely bothers you, not someone who has harmed you, but someone whose mere existence irritates you. Someone whose behavior triggers a reaction in you that feels disproportionate. Jung would say, look carefully at what bothers you about them, because what you see is likely something that lives in you, something you cannot acknowledge in yourself, so you see it out there, in them. This is not comfortable. It is not meant to be, but it is one of the most honest mirrors the psyche offers us. The qualities that most disturb us in others are often the qualities we have most vigorously denied in ourselves. The person who cannot stand arrogance in others often carries unexpressed pride. The person who is furious at the laziness of others often sits on buried desires to simply rest. The person who judges the weakness of others often carries a deep terror of their own vulnerability. This is not a judgment. It is simply how the psyche works. It hides what it cannot face, and then it shows it to us in the world around us. The second place the shadow appears is in dreams. Jung spent decades studying dreams. He believed they were the language of the unconscious. And in dreams, the shadow often appears as a figure, a stranger, a pursuer, someone dark and threatening, chasing you through the night. Jung said, "Do not run from this figure. Turn toward it. Ask it what it wants." Because in most cases, the shadow figure in a dream is not your enemy. It is a part of yourself, desperate to be acknowledged. That terrifying presence, chasing you through sleep, is often carrying something you need. Strength you abandoned, feeling you suppressed, truth you refused to hear. The third place the shadow appears is in moments of intensity. When you say something and immediately think, where did that come from? When you react to something far more strongly than the situation warrants. When you feel a sudden surge of emotion that seems to come from somewhere deeper than the moment itself. These are the shadow's interruptions, its attempts to break through the ordered surface of consciousness, not to destroy, but to be heard. The gift inside. The shadow. What is hidden there? Most people think of the shadow as something to be feared, a darkness to be managed, a problem to be solved. But Jung saw something else entirely. He saw treasure, hidden inside the very thing we have been most afraid to look at. Is something extraordinary, something powerful, something that belongs to you, that was always meant to be yours. Jung called this the golden shadow. And tonight, before we go any deeper, I want you to understand this. Because the work of meeting your shadow is not only about confronting darkness, it is about recovering light, light that was taken from you, or that you gave away without realizing what you were losing. Here is something Jung understood that many people miss entirely. The shadow is not only darkness, it is not only what is broken, or shameful, or dangerous. The shadow also contains gold. Jung called this the golden shadow, and it may be the most important thing he ever said about it, because when we exile parts of ourselves, we do not only exile what is difficult, we exile what is powerful, what is creative, what is wild and alive and extraordinary. Jung wrote, "The shadow does not consist only of weaknesses, it also displays a number of good qualities, such as normal instincts, appropriate reactions, realistic insights, creative impulses." Think about what this means. The child who was told, "You are too much," hid their intensity. That intensity went into the shadow. And now, as an adult, they wonder why they feel so muted, so flat, so unable to fully feel. The person who was shamed for their ambition put their drive into the shadow, and now they watch others succeed and feel a rage they cannot explain. The person who was told, "You are too sensitive," buried their depth of feeling, and now they move through the world in a kind of emotional numbness, longing for connection, but unable to reach it. What went into the shadow was not just shame. It was power. It was feeling. It was the fullness of who you are. And it is waiting there, in the basement, not rotting, not lost, waiting. This is why Jung said, meeting your shadow is not a descent into darkness. It is a retrieval. You are going down to bring something back up, something that belongs to you, something that was always yours. The integration of the shadow is not the elimination of light. It is the discovery that you are larger than you knew, more complex, more capable, more whole. Jung wrote, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." The goal is not to become perfect. The goal is to become complete. And completion requires everything: the light and the dark, the strength and the wound, the mask and what lies beneath it. The work of integration, how to meet your shadow. We have spoken about what the shadow is, how it forms, where it appears in your daily life, and the unexpected gifts it carries. Now comes the most important question of all. What do you actually do? How do you meet this hidden part of yourself? Jung did not offer a 5-step plan. He did not believe in shortcuts. What he offered was something more honest, a quality of attention, a willingness to sit with discomfort, a kind of radical honesty that most of us spend our entire lives gently, quietly, avoiding. Tonight, we explore what that honestly looks like, not as a task to be completed, but as a way of being with yourself. So, what does it mean to actually meet your shadow? Jung did not offer a simple technique. He offered something deeper. He offered a way of being with yourself, a quality of attention, an honesty that most of us spend our entire lives avoiding. The first step is simply noticing. Begin to watch yourself, not with judgment, with curiosity. When something irritates you, pause and ask, what does this show me about myself? When you react more strongly than expected, pause and ask, what is being touched here? That goes deeper than this moment. When you catch yourself judging another person harshly, pause and ask, do I carry any of this within me? These questions are not comfortable, but they are honest. And honesty is the first light you can bring into the basement. The second step is dialogue. Jung called this active imagination, the practice of entering into conversation with the figures of the unconscious. In the quiet of the night, you can begin this practice. If there is a part of yourself you sense you have been hiding, ask it a question, silently, in the dark. What are you? What do you need? What have I refused to see? And then, listen. Not for words necessarily, but for feelings, for images, for the quiet knowing that sometimes comes when the mind is finally still enough to hear itself. The third step is acceptance. This is the hardest part, because what you find in the shadow may not be what you hope to find. You may find anger you are ashamed of, desires you have judged, fears you have told yourself you do not have. And the work is not to immediately change these things. The work is to accept that they exist, To say, "This is also part of me. I did not choose it, but I will not pretend it is not there." Jung believed that the moment you can accept something in yourself without flinching, its power over you begins to diminish, not because you have destroyed it, but because you have brought it into the light. And in the light, things can be understood, worked with, transformed. What happens when the shadow is ignored? The cost of unconsciousness. There is a question that must be asked. What happens if you do not do this work? What happens if the shadow remains unseen? If the basement stays locked? If the hidden parts of the self are never brought into the light? Jung was not vague about this. He was precise. And what he described was not abstract theory. It was something he watched happen again and again in the people he worked with and in the world around him. The cost of ignoring the shadow is not small. It is not contained. It touches everything: your relationships, your health, your sense of self. And as Jung showed, it can touch entire nations. Tonight, we look honestly at that cost, not to frighten, but to illuminate, because sometimes understanding what is at stake is what finally gives us the courage to look. Jung was very clear about what happens when the shadow is ignored. He did not leave this as an abstraction. He watched it happen. In individuals, in nations, in history. When the shadow is denied, it does not weaken, it grows. Jung wrote, "The shadow is a moral problem that challenges the whole ego personality. To become conscious of it requires considerable moral effort. And the work of that effort, if not undertaken, spills outward. The person who cannot face their own anger becomes controlled by it. In small moments, in sudden cruelties, in the inexplicable damage done to those they love. The person who cannot face their own fear becomes dominated by it, in avoidance, in the slow shrinking of their world, in the life unlived, because the risk felt too great. The person who cannot face their own darkness projects it onto the world and begins to see enemies everywhere, begins to divide the world into pure and impure, good and evil, us and them. Jung saw this mechanism behind the great horrors of human history, the shadow of entire cultures projected outward onto other peoples, other races, other beliefs. The destruction that followed was the cost of collective unconsciousness. This is why Jung said, one of the greatest dangers to civilization itself is the unexamined shadow, not the shadow of monsters, but the shadow of ordinary people, people like you, people like me, who have simply never looked. And this is not a condemnation, it is an invitation, because the moment you begin to look, everything changes. The moment you bring one piece of your shadow into the light of consciousness, you have done something extraordinary. You have interrupted a cycle that may have run in your family for generations. You have chosen consciousness over comfort, wholeness, over the illusion of perfection. And in doing so, you have made the world just slightly more sane. Now, let everything rest. The thinking, the questioning, the searching, let it all become soft and formless, Like clouds dissolving in a dark sky, you have done something tonight, simply by being willing to listen. You have turned, even slightly, toward your own depths, and the unconscious, which does its deepest work in sleep, will continue this turning while you rest. Dreams may come. Let them. Whatever figures appear, whatever feelings arise, receive them with openness. They are not your enemies. They are messengers from the part of you that has been waiting a very long time to be heard. Jung wrote, "Who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakens." Tonight, you have looked inside, and in that looking, something has shifted, imperceptibly, quietly, the way all real change happens, not all at once, but in the dark, while we rest, while we allow, while we stop fighting, and simply receive. Breathe in and breathe out. You are safe. You are whole, more whole than you know. The shadow is not your enemy. It is the unlived part of your life, asking to be lived, and it will wait for you, patiently, as long as it takes. For now, sleep. Let the night do its work. Let the unconscious speak in whatever language it chooses, and know that in the morning you will wake just slightly more yourself than when you closed your eyes. Good night. Rest now. The shadow is not the end of the journey. It is the beginning. And you have already begun.